So, Rosa, everybody knows the story of Oedipus. It's one of the most famous myths to come down from Greek antiquity. It's the story of the guy who solves the riddle of the Sphinx, who becomes the king of Thebes. Thebes gets beset by plague, and as Sophocles' tragedy shows, it's the story of how he discovers that he killed his father, and then he married his mother. He had sex with her, and they had children together, and that's the cause of the plague. And probably one of the reasons why the story is so famous nowadays is that Sigmund Freud, the founding father of psychoanalysis, invented something called the Oedipus complex, in which he argued that everybody is like Oedipus. So at the end of the 19th century, Freud was really interested in the fact that the audiences in the theatres in Vienna were still horrified by Sophocles' tragedy. And Freud argued that Sophocles' tragedy speaks somehow to our unconscious, that we relate to Oedipus, because ultimately we're all like Oedipus. We all want to return to our mother's bosom and kill our father out of jealousy with him. It's a shocking story. But for Freud, therefore for Freud, there's something timeless and trans-historical about Sophocles' tragedy. But is that really how it would have been received in 5th century Athens when it was originally performed?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think you're speaking in terms of timelessness and universality. That I think a 5th century Athenian male viewer probably wouldn't have been thinking in those terms. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, of course, that the play would have been performed as part of a major citywide festival, the City Dionysia, in which the entire city of Athens would have been shut down for several days. It was a major political event for the city. There were, for example, 2 whole days of processions and sacrifices, and 4 days of performances. So this one particular play would have been inscribed in this whole larger, performance for the city, which also crucially took place at the end of March, which is the start of the sailing season, because it had a major international audience. Lots of very important guests would have been there to witness these processions, which would have involved prominent citizens and generals, the showcase of the tribute to Athens that allies would have brought in, even something as strange as a parade of war orphans in military garb. So before we even get to this idea of timelessness, we need to think about a viewer who would have been coming to the theater to view this play, but then would have witnessed this whole citywide performance. So I think, well, who knows? I mean, I think, of course, a viewer watching an individual play may have thought about the larger questions that this play would have brought to his mind. But I think it's just fascinating to think that this original play was inscribed within this larger political performance for Athens. That's also, of course, I didn't even mention, of course, it's also inscribed within a major religious festival to the god Dionysus. So there's sort of these larger political and religious resonances that we don't have anymore, that were a crucial part of experiencing this play.
So when we go to the theatre nowadays, we don't parade on stage a group of orphans whose parents have, fathers have fought for the state. We don't have sacrifices overseen by generals. So the experience of going to the theatre at the City Dionysia in Athens was a religious and intensely political experience involving the whole citizen body. So it's a very different experience of going to the theatre in antiquity from what it is today.